This engraving captures the 1606 siege of Malacca, a clash between empires fighting for control over one of the most vital trade routes on Earth. Your eye is immediately drawn to the center of the frame. Massive European galleons dominate the water, their hulls and sails towering over everything else in the composition. Illustrations like this have long reinforced a specific perspective on naval warfare. They suggest that power is defined by the size of a ship, the number of its sails, and the weight of its cannons. But in the bottom left corner, pushed to the very edges of the artwork, are several long, narrow boats that are easy to overlook. This visual hierarchy hides a practical reality. In the narrow geography of the Malacca Strait, the success of the entire campaign relied on the very vessels relegated to the margins of the drawing. This is a map of the Malacca Strait. Notice how the waterway narrows into a tight bottleneck between the Malay Peninsula and Sumatra. This environment is a minefield for heavy navies. The passages are narrow, the coastlines are filled with shallow banks, and the wind patterns often shift without warning. For deep-water European galleons, these conditions create a fatal vulnerability. If the wind dies or a current shifts, a 1,000-ton warship becomes a stationary target. Local shipbuilders solved this by prioritizing a specific mechanical requirement, maintaining consistent movement and heading even when the wind fails. Success in the strait required a vessel engineered for the local environment rather than a ship designed for the open ocean. The result was the Malay galley. These ships were lightweight, built with a long, low profile to minimize drag through the water. While European armadas depended entirely on the wind for propulsion, the galley utilized a hybrid system. This wireframe shows the combination. The ship used traditional sails for speed in open water, but integrated banks of oars for confined spaces. By deploying these oars, the crew generated their own momentum, driving the ship straight into a headwind and rendering the weather irrelevant. This manual power allowed for precise control. A galley could pivot, reverse, or navigate shallow channels that would ground a larger vessel. In the volatile currents of the strait, the ability to ignore the wind provided a clear tactical leverage that larger European ships could not match. European naval doctrine at the time relied on static lines of ships delivering long-range artillery bombardments. The lightweight galley was not built to withstand a direct hit from a heavy cannon or to win a traditional broadside duel. Instead, galley commanders used their agility to weave through the gaps in the slow-moving enemy armada. They struck from the blind spots of the larger ships, engaging in close-quarters harassment right under the elevation line of the enemy's heavy guns. If the larger ships attempted to pursue, the galleys retreated into shallow coastal waters where the deep-hulled galleons would run aground. The galley neutralized heavy firepower by forcing the enemy to fight on terms dictated by the terrain and movement rather than physical strength. Reevaluating this engraving reveals a different story about who was actually in control of the water. The crews operating these galleys, primarily from the Sultanate of Johor, held a detailed map of the strait's hidden depths and shifting currents in their heads. Without these local allies, the invading European armadas were sailing blind into an environment they didn't understand. The siege relied on these local fleets to scout the safest routes, secure the perimeter, and guide the heavy galleons through the dangerous local waters. The Sultanate of Johor's fleet provided the mobility the Europeans lacked. Their knowledge of the geography turned these small vessels into the primary instruments for controlling movement across the entire theater of war. The 1606 siege represents a clash between two different philosophies of maritime power. The European mindset focused on imposing strength. They relied on massive architecture and stationary firepower to hold a fixed position. The Malay mindset focused on harmony with the environment. Power was derived from fluid movement, adaptability, and the use of local geography as a tool. By prioritizing agility over mass, these local forces could consistently frustrate and outmaneuver the most heavily armed empires of the era. In a complex, volatile environment, supremacy belongs to the force that understands the space they occupy.